Hi guys, so today I'd like to talk about mental health and the fact that I've always had mental health. It's always been present in my life. And I know that's a bit of a cliche because, well, some of the sentences that you hear thrown around are, we all have mental health. And I don't even mean that in a negative way. It's actually very true. Everybody does have mental health. It's not just something that happens to certain people or, randomly one day you wake up feeling anxious or depressed. We do all have mental health and it's something that we should take care of. But I'd like to talk more about having mental health in your history or in your past, or just it having been a common theme in your life. And this was prompted by an article that I read, which I'll link in the comments, talking about a person who suffered from extreme anxiety and stress at their workplace and ended up committing suicide. It's a really shocking and sad article, actually. But in that article, they talk about how there had been some history of mental health in that person's family. And it made me think that it's really important to be aware of these things because, yes, it can come on suddenly. You don't necessarily have to have a history in your family, but if you do, or if you have a history yourself, then most likely it's something that you should be paying more attention to, educating yourself on, and those around you, so that they know that, there is a possibility that there's a history, that there's something going on with you, that they're informed, that they can educate themselves, that they know how to help you, and that they can spot warning signs if there are any, and if you're unable to spot them yourself. And then in general, I had been meaning to talk about this for a while, and I just think that it's good to bring it up and raise awareness about that. So for me, my experience with mental health, I think the first time I remember being depressed was in high school. I had repeated a class, and so all my friends had moved on to the higher level, and I had stayed behind with one other friend. And so I was stuck with a bunch of people that I didn't know. All my other friends had gone. I mean, the buildings were right next to each other, but it's still different, because everybody's progressing and you have to stay behind. And these kids actually didn't like me, and they started bullying me, and they were being just really mean to me. I don't even really remember. What I know was that they were excluding me, they were being complete assholes, making fun, etc., all that stuff, the usual kids bullying in high school. And my friend, the one who had repeated the year with me, somehow managed to get into their favors and get along with them. So I was really excluded. I literally had no one else left. And what I remember is that at the time, I really didn't want to go to school anymore. I just remember feeling really depressed, lying in bed, not wanting to go to school, dreading it. Just, that feeling that you have when you really don't want to be somewhere. I'm sure many people can relate. So that's really my first experience that I can remember with depression, because I'm pretty sure that I was depressed, although I was never clinically diagnosed. I can only go off my own feeling, but yeah, it was as I described, just feeling really, really down and demotivated. I got over that by myself. I don't even really remember how, but from one day to the next, I sort of realized, well, who cares what these people think of me? There are the people who like me, and those are the ones that matter to me, and I'm just going to stick with them and screw all these guys who don't like me, because I don't like them anyway either, so what's the point? That's very simplified, but that's kind of how I moved on from that, and I've really kept that with me ever since. But I must have been 13 or 14, so pretty young. Then I remember when I was 17, asking my mom to see a psychologist. I had seen several psychologists before as a child, and I spontaneously asked her, from what I can recall, to consult one. I think because I was feeling depressed again or isolated. I was in a class once again. I had been separated from my friends. I was feeling a bit isolated. I didn't really know where I fit in, and I think having self-doubt about myself, about the future, all those kinds of things. Again, it's difficult to remember. I just remember asking to see this psychologist, and she was great, actually. I really liked her. She really helped me. Again, the details are fuzzy, but I think the important message here is that already by that age, it was very normal for me to look after my mental health. Even though I didn't know what that was and that's what I was doing, I didn't hesitate to ask to see a psychologist. I was absolutely unfazed by it, and I knew that she was helping me. So those are like really key factors. After that, my next experience with depression was when I was at university. So I was at university in the UK. I went to Nottingham and I had a huge culture shock. Now, that sounds crazy because you're thinking you sound British, but I grew up in France and I had just spent the best year of my life with some friends in France, like really making great memories. And then suddenly, from one day to the next, I was in the UK, in the middle of the UK, with a bunch of very British students in an environment that was completely foreign to me, and it was just awful. It was a huge culture shock. I had not expected the British culture to be like that, the university culture. I really had no idea what to expect. All I'd known was, like vacation with family, which is basically not at all reality. And they didn't understand me. They didn't understand who I was, that I was French and English, that I had this mixed background. So they just didn't get it at all. So I was really struggling because I was missing my friends. I also had a boyfriend at the time that I'd left behind. I felt misunderstood. I felt like I didn't fit in the culture. And it was just really, really confusing time. And I was depressed, I would say, probably for the majority of the time, at least 2 years. During that time, I remember feeling very, very, very lonely. I remember thinking that the worst feeling you could ever have is loneliness, because I would go to events and socialize and still feel lonely even though I was surrounded by people, and that was really hard. So I tried to see a therapist, considering that I had experience with that, but the university, unfortunately, considering it was the NHS in the UK, you have to have a prescription from a doctor, then you have to get on a waiting list to see a psychiatrist. I mean, forget it. Like, I was just not prepared to go through all this hassle to maybe one day see a psychiatrist after being on a waiting list for 1 year. So the university told me they had this counseling service, and I spoke with a counselor there, and the best that the counselor could do was just listen. They couldn't give any advice. They couldn't really respond to what you were saying, I think because they weren't healthcare professionals, so that was all that they could do. And that helped. It definitely helped to have someone to talk to who was objective, but it wasn't enough. Thankfully, though, they gave me a website called Mind Gym, an Australian website, which practiced CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. So thanks to that website, I actually developed a lot more awareness around CBT, which is recognizing your thoughts and your thought patterns and distinguishing the negative or your thought patterns from the actual reality. So there were a lot of exercises on Mood Gym, and there were tests that could determine how you were feeling today, more sad, more anxious, etc. And then there were exercises where, for example, they would have a person in a different scenario, and you could identify, okay, person is thinking, I'm a loser, nobody likes me, no one's ever going to come talk to me, all the way to, yeah, I'm just having a good time in a bar by myself, going to enjoy a drink and then go home, and kind of determine, okay, which one is the reality, and particularly questioning, if you're sitting there and thinking everybody thinks I'm a loser, how do you know that's true? Have they come up to you and told you that you're a loser? No. So all those types of things. And that actually really helped. I definitely felt an improvement, at least in awareness, when it came to my thoughts and how I was feeling, and I think it helped me to manage it much better. And then I also got through that by building community. At the time I was practicing capoeira, and thankfully I found a group of like-minded people, and I really threw myself into capoeira, the sport, but also the Brazilian culture and all the energy that I was getting from that, from the music, from the capoeira, from the people. Like, that was a real lifesaver for me. So that was kind of my next episode with mental health. So after that, I did get over it, of course. I struggled, I would say, for the 3 years of undergrad, but it did get better. I wasn't, like depressed the whole time. I learned to manage it, and I was happier and found joy and good moments that I enjoyed. So I think it was a gradual process. Like by the end of year 3, I was definitely in a better place than when I had first started. And after that, I went to London to do my master's degree. And that was my first encounter with, well, not my first, but like, I would say, yeah, my biggest encounter with stress and anxiety. And I didn't know it at the time yet. And of course, that should foreshadow my experience at work. Now looking back, I'm like, it's so obvious. So I was really, really stressed out. I was at the LSE, I was feeling very much under pressure. I was with a lot of very intelligent people that had all been top of their class, and I felt completely out of my depth and very, under pressure to succeed. Not to mention that the school is constantly going on about how, the best people have come through LSE, blah, blah, blah. So you feel, I took the pressure very seriously. So I was very stressed about studying, making sure I got good grades, just like keeping on top of everything. Like we had reading lists per subject each week, and I felt so under pressure to read everything that was on the reading list, which is practically impossible. And this manifested itself by, for example, I would struggle to fall asleep at night, and I would most definitely wake up in the morning in a panic, being like, I have to work. I was very stressed out. And I constantly, I would feel guilty taking time off, so I was studying every day, like very, very long hours. I was still training capoeira, of course, but that was pretty much it, I would say. Capoeira and studying, I would spend hours at the library, and every time I took some time off to do something I enjoyed, I would just feel really guilty. So, and in addition to that, of course, physical tension, so my body was really, really tense. A mix, I would guess, of capoeira and stress. And that's when I discovered that I was also grinding my teeth or clenching my jaw at night because I visited the dentist for pain that I was experiencing. And when she asked me if I was stressed, I was like, yes, extremely stressed. Ah! And then she's like, okay, that's why your teeth hurt, because you're clenching your jaw all day long and all night long. So that was clearly anxiety, although I didn't know it at the time. And that affected me again, the sleep deprivation, etc., etc. But then the degree ended, and I traveled to Brazil for 3 months, and life calmed down, and, things went, let's say, back to normal. Nothing nothing in particular going on. So by now, if we think about it, that's like high school, the depression when I repeated a class, then seeing a psychiatrist around the age of 17, then depression again when I was in the UK for a very long time, and then anxiety and stress during my master's degree. So by now, this is about 4, let's say, periods of time during which my mental health was definitely affected by external factors. And I was taking ways to manage it, but I had a lot less awareness about what it was that was going on, why I was experiencing those things, how I was responding to them, etc. And then, of course, we get to my job when I was working in the agency, and that's where I experienced the most of my most recent mental health issues, including the anxiety, the burnout, and the extreme levels of stress. Looking back, if I really look at what I've just described to you in my experience with mental health, it's actually quite obvious that I was, in a way, predisposed to this. Not to say that it had to happen that way, but just to say that based on what had happened previously, I'm quite sensitive to stress. I'm a sensitive person emotionally, let's say. And I get affected or more affected than others by external factors. So, in a sense, it's almost obvious that I was going to be affected by such a high pressure work environment. And I think the really important thing here to notice is that it's just having that awareness of your past, of who you are, and the sooner you're able to deal with it and learn, what it is that you're experiencing and find coping mechanisms, the better. So not to say that, I would do it differently. I think, fortunately for me, I've coped really well with everything that I've been through. Everything has been a learning, and it's never gone dramatically wrong or turned into something much bigger than what I've just described. And that's very fortunate. And I think to some extent I can thank my mom for that, because I had been seeing therapists as a kid, and it just seemed very, very normal. It wasn't something at all frowned upon, and then I just saw that as a normal way to continue my life, which is why even I missed a gap. But even at some point whilst I was during the agency, I started seeing a therapist, and then eventually I started working with my coach, because self-development and has always been part of my journey. But I think the really important thing here is to know that for some people this is part of their past, but they don't have the same awareness. For example, as I just described to you, even I wasn't really aware at the time that what I was experiencing was depression or anxiety. It's only now with hindsight that I can say that that's what it was. And that's why I think it's really important to raise awareness so that people can first understand what it is they're experiencing, second, seek help if they need it, but also for those around them to have that awareness. If you know someone who tells you that they've had previous experiences like this in their life, and I would say particularly if they're your spouse, your partner, or someone in your family, someone that's very close to you, because this doesn't come up often in conversations with people that you're less close to. If you know that there's a history, or maybe there's even a history in their family, then pay extra attention to the signs, to how they're feeling. Help them be more in touch with who they are, so that they can recognize the signs on their own. But yeah, I think that's really the most important thing to me. That was the key takeaway from reading that article. It's not that, we should just dismiss this as like, oh yeah, there were previous signs, therefore this person was more sensitive or more likely to. That's not acceptable. It's not just because you had a history that, oh well, they were bound to commit suicide. On the contrary, there were signs, there was a history, so we should be taking extra care of these people, and putting extra effort into educating them and those around them and raising awareness. So yeah, that's the reason why I wanted to share my story. I think first for that, and second just to show that mental health is a journey, and it can be with you from beginning to end, or it can suddenly flare up at a certain point in time when you're going through a difficult situation. But just have the consciousness, when you have the right headspace, when you're feeling back to normal, when you're feeling yourself again, try to reflect on that and what you learned from it. And if you are interested and if you can get help, then do it with the help of a professional. And if not, then do it by yourself, or with a friend. It doesn't have to be a healthcare professional. And I think the third takeaway that I have for this video is that seeking help, working with a professional, be it a therapist or a coach, is absolutely normal, and it's a really good thing that you can do for yourself. It's not about others, it's not about perception, it's about you taking care of yourself. So I know it's not for everyone, and in the stories that I shared on my blog, the testimonials for Mental Health Week, Mental Health Awareness Week, some people, in fact I think most people actually had been to see a therapist one way or another, whilst others have also taken medication to help them with their mental health issues. We each have our own way of dealing with it, but I would definitely recommend it, and don't hold back if you think that you need that kind of help. Often it's very hard to be objective ourselves, and for our friends and family it's also very difficult for them to be objective, because they're so involved, they're so in the moment, They really want to help you, they care about you, and they have an opinion, which is normal, of course. Or as healthcare professionals or coaches who are just professionals, not necessarily healthcare, they're trained to be more objective and to look at things from a different standpoint, and they're not involved in your day-to-day, and that can really help them get a different perspective that you might need. So yeah, that's my experience. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I'm personally really enjoying sharing my mental health journey with you all. There are still many more stories that I want to share, but this was an important one that I wanted to cover. And if you've had a journey or an experience with mental health, or something that you'd like to share, then please do so in the comments below. I've always dreamt of doing this in the comments below. Or I'm going to embed this in a blog post, so you can also leave a comment on the blog. Please share, I would love to know. And at any time, feel free to reach out with questions. Thanks, bye.